They slapped a $500 fine on James for parking his own truck in his driveway, claiming it violated aesthetic standards. The HOA president, Linda Thompson, smirked as she warned him that fighting back would be a waste of time. Rules were rules, after all. What she didn't know was that James wasn't just another homeowner to push around. When the truth about her secret schemes came to light, the entire neighborhood would be left speechless. But let's start from the beginning. James Carter cherished his quiet suburban life. His home, a cozy single-story house with freshly painted shutters and a welcoming porch swing, was more than just a structure. It was his refuge. The driveway, long enough to fit his beloved red Ford F-150, stood as a symbol of hard work and pride. That truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was his partner in countless family road trips and weekend projects. The mornings in his neighborhood were usually calm, the crisp autumn air carrying the distant hum of leaf blowers and the aroma of brewing coffee. But this Monday was different. Stepping outside to take his kids to school, James froze at the sight of a bright orange violation notice slapped across his truck's windshield. The paper flapped slightly in the breeze, as if mocking him. His brows furrowed as he peeled it off, scanning the bold print. Violation. Vehicle breaches HOA aesthetic standards. What standards? James's confusion turned to irritation as he glanced at his perfectly maintained driveway. He leaned against the truck, flipping through the HOA handbook stored on his phone. Rule after rule blurred past his eyes, but there wasn't a single mention of driveway parking restrictions. That's when she appeared. Linda Thompson, the HOA president, marched up the sidewalk with her ever-present clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield of authority. She was a middle-aged woman with a sharp bob haircut that matched her personality, precise and rigid. Her gaze locked onto James like a hawk spotting prey. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. James immediately recognized the tone, one that carried judgment masked as politeness. Before he could respond, she pointed at the truck with the tip of her pen. "I assume you've seen the notice?" "I have," James replied, keeping his voice measured. "But I checked the rules. There's nothing in the handbook about parking here." Linda's smirk widened. "That's because the board recently updated the guidelines. It's all in the memo we sent out last month. Didn't you read it?" James felt a wave of frustration rise. "I never got any memo, Linda," he said, meeting her gaze. "This is my property, my driveway, my truck, and as far as I can tell, I'm not breaking any rules." Linda tilted her head, her expression both smug and condescending. "Well, you must have missed it, but the rule is there now, and I'm afraid you'll need to move the vehicle immediately. It's an eyesore and brings down the neighborhood's value." James couldn't believe what he was hearing. "An eyesore?" he repeated, incredulous. His truck was spotless, its red paint gleaming in the sunlight. "Linda, this feels personal." She didn't flinch. "It's not personal, Mr. Carter. It's about maintaining standards. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other violations to address." With that, she turned on her heel and strode away, her clipboard held high like a trophy. James stood there, the violation notice crumpled in his hand. He knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. By the end of the week, things had escalated. A letter from the HOA arrived in James's mailbox, this time more official. It accused him of non-compliance and demanded a $500 fine. Attached was a warning. Failure to pay or remove the truck would result in legal action. James sat at his kitchen table that night, the letter spread out in front of him like evidence in a trial. His wife placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with concern. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He took a deep breath, his jaw set. "I'm not paying this. If Linda wants a fight, she'll get one." Outside, the truck gleamed under the porch light, parked exactly where it had always been. Little did James know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would test his patience, his resolve, and his right to call his driveway his own. James sat at his kitchen table, the crumpled HOA fine notice in his hand, his wife watching him with concern. The usual warmth of their home felt dimmed by the weight of frustration. "This isn't right," James muttered, shaking his head. "Linda's making up rules as she goes." Determined to uncover the truth, James started knocking on neighbors' doors. Mrs. Avery, a retired teacher next door, sighed deeply when he mentioned Linda. "She fined me last Christmas for my lights," she said, "claimed they didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic." Across the street, Mr. Coleman revealed he'd been fined for his lawn being too long, despite mowing it weekly. With every conversation, James pieced together a pattern of arbitrary enforcement and overreach. Late one evening, James sat in his garage, combing through the HOA bylaws. The faint hum of the overhead bulb and the smell of motor oil filled the room. His eyes narrowed as he found the memo Linda had referenced about parking restrictions. It was clear. Linda had bypassed the required community vote and pushed the rule through herself. "She's acting like this is her kingdom," James muttered, picking up his phone to call a lawyer. While James prepared his case, Linda escalated. On Saturday morning, James awoke to the sound of a tow truck idling in his driveway. Linda stood next to it, clipboard in hand, looking smug. "Your truck violates emergency access guidelines," she declared loudly. "It has to go." James stepped outside, barefoot and calm, though his voice was firm. "You can't do this, Linda. This is my property." He planted himself in front of his truck, arms crossed. Neighbors began gathering on their porches, their phones raised to record. "You're breaking HOA rules," Linda shrieked, her voice trembling with anger. "And you're breaking the law," James fired back. His wife, recording the entire standoff, captured the moment Linda stormed off in defeat as the tow truck driver quietly drove away. That night, the video of the confrontation went viral, drawing thousands of views and supportive comments. Strangers shared their own HOA horror stories, and James found himself at the center of a growing movement against abuses of power. As he reviewed his evidence, James knew this fight was no longer just about his truck. It was about standing up for fairness and justice. The courthouse buzzed with subdued energy as James Carter entered the room. Sunlight streamed through high windows, casting sharp beams onto the polished wood floors. James, dressed in a simple navy blazer and crisp white shirt, carried a folder thick with documents. His expression was calm, but his clenched jaw revealed the tension simmering beneath the surface. Across the aisle, Linda Thompson sat flanked by two sharp-suited lawyers, her expression smug and triumphant. She wore her signature tailored blazer, her clipboard replaced with a leather-bound notebook that matched her air of superiority. The lawsuit from the HOA painted James as a serial non-complier and accused him of disrupting the HOA's operations. But James wasn't here to back down. He had countersued, alleging property rights violations and misuse of HOA authority. The stakes felt enormous. This wasn't just about a truck anymore. It was about standing up to a system that thrived on unchecked power. The courtroom settled as the judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, called for opening arguments. Linda's lawyer went first, spinning a narrative of a troublesome homeowner who refused to abide by neighborhood rules. Linda nodded along, her confident demeanor unwavering. But James's attorney, a steady, deliberate man named Daniel, was unfazed. When it was his turn, he calmly outlined the facts. The rule Linda referenced had never been properly voted on, and James's rights as a property owner were clear and indisputable. As the proceedings unfolded, James's stack of evidence proved invaluable. Neighbors had come forward with their own stories, and one after another, they testified about Linda's manipulative behavior. Mrs. Avery detailed how Linda fined her for holiday decorations. Mr. Coleman described being threatened with legal action over his lawn. Their stories painted a damning picture of an HOA president who ruled with intimidation and ignored the community's voice. The turning point came when Daniel presented emails obtained from a concerned HOA board member. The messages revealed that Linda had bypassed required community votes and fabricated meeting minutes to enforce her own agenda. As the emails were read aloud, Linda's smug expression faltered. Her lawyers exchanged uneasy glances, and a murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge's gaze narrowed as she examined the so-called updated rules. "Ms. Thompson," she said, her voice stern, "it's clear these rules were implemented without proper procedure. Your actions not only overstepped your authority, but also undermined the integrity of this HOA." Linda's confidence crumbled. Her attempts to explain were met with icy stares from the judge and muffled whispers from the gallery. James sat quietly, his hands folded, his calm demeanor masking the relief washing over him. When the verdict was delivered, it felt like a weight had been lifted. The judge cleared James of all fines and violations, ruling that Linda's actions were unauthorized and invalid. The HOA was ordered to reimburse James for his legal fees, and Linda was removed from her position as president. The courtroom buzzed with quiet approval as the gavel struck. Outside, James was greeted by his wife and a small group of neighbors who had supported him throughout the ordeal. As they shared quiet words of congratulations, Linda slipped out of the courthouse, her head low, her once proud confidence shattered. For James, the victory was more than personal. It was a stand for fairness and accountability, a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful they seem, is above the rules. The weight of the fight had been heavy, but as he stood in the sunlight outside the courthouse, James knew it had been worth every moment. As Linda Thompson stepped out of the courthouse, her confident facade shattered, her head hung low, the weight of defeat visible in every step. The air outside was crisp, a stark contrast to the heavy tension that had filled the courtroom. James Carter stood nearby, surrounded by a small group of neighbors who had supported him throughout his battle. For the first time in months, he allowed himself a moment of relief. The victory wasn't just his. It belonged to everyone who had endured Linda's tyranny. The sense of triumph was palpable as neighbors gathered that evening in James's driveway, a symbol of the battle they'd all witnessed. His red Ford F-150 gleamed under the glow of porch lights, standing proudly in the very spot that had sparked the conflict. "It's not just a truck anymore," James said, raising his voice slightly to address the small crowd. "It's a reminder that we all have the right to stand up for what's fair, no matter who tries to take it away." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, a shared acknowledgement of the courage it had taken to challenge the HOA's unchecked power. Mrs. Avery, the retired teacher who'd been fined for her holiday lights, patted James on the back. "You did what the rest of us were too scared to do," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." James's story didn't just stay within the bounds of his neighborhood. The video of his confrontation with Linda, paired with the news of his courtroom victory, spread across social media and local news stations. Strangers reached out to share their own HOA horror stories, thanking James for inspiring them to fight back. "It's not just about a truck," James repeated in interviews. "It's about standing up for what's right, even when it feels like the odds are against you." In the weeks following the trial, the HOA underwent a complete overhaul. New, transparent guidelines were implemented, and Linda was officially removed from her role as president. Her replacement, a soft-spoken but firm man named Greg Parker, promised to restore trust and fairness within the community. Neighbors felt a newfound sense of unity, no longer bound by fear of arbitrary fines and threats. One evening, as James stood in his driveway, watching his kids play basketball under the setting sun, his wife stepped beside him, resting her hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "You showed them they can't just push people around." James smiled, his gaze fixed on the red truck that had become a quiet symbol of resilience. "We did it," he replied, his voice filled with quiet pride. The neighborhood wasn't just a better place, it was a stronger one, a community brought together by one man's refusal to back down. And though the battle had been exhausting, James knew it had been worth every moment. His story became a beacon for others, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, justice can prevail.